What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Saturdays in the SEC, episode 119. We're back for week two of our 2024 SEC preview series. Got two teams tonight that I'm excited to talk about, and it's two teams with really high expectations for this upcoming season. I said last week when we did Alabama and Florida that it was two of the more interesting teams, in my opinion, for this upcoming season. But when I got diving into these teams and just knowing their expectations coming in, I could say the exact same for these two. And I feel like that's going to be a theme of this preview series. But we're going to talk about Tennessee and Ole Miss tonight. Like I said, two playoff caliber teams this year, two teams with playoff or bust, mentalities. A couple coaches that are Lane Kiffin's going into his fifth year. Josh Heupel's going into his third year, I believe, third or fourth year. So, a couple programs that have kind of been established a little bit. Like I said, and really high expectations, coming into this season, and two teams that expect to be playing football, deep into December and January. First, kicking it off with the Tennessee Volunteers. Just kind of looking at this roster, I mean, I was really impressed. And I thought it was very fascinating. Tennessee only brought in 9 transfers during this whole transfer cycle. That was the lowest amount in the SEC. Now,
Yeah,
they
but
only
they
had,
still ranked like 13 though, with only
yeah,
9 commitments.
yeah, I mean, it was really impressive. They only lost 15, outgoing. So obviously, not as many spots to fill as some other teams within the league. But I really like, some of the pieces they were able to add. But, this is a team that brings back a good bit of experience here in 2024. Kind of looking at them offensively, we've talked a lot this offseason about, you know, Tennessee getting back to their 2022 form offensively. I've kind of made it a theme over the last few months that, Tennessee's offense last year took a big step back, especially in the pass game and being able to generate explosive plays down the field. Well, don't just take it from me. I got numbers here to back it up from what they did a year ago and then versus what they did in 2022. So in 2022, they went 11-2, first in the country in points per game, 46.1. They were first in yards per game, 525.5. Passing yards per game, they were fifth with 326. And they generated 80 plays of 20 yards or more. That was 14th in the country. Last year, 31.8 points per game, that was 35th. So they went from first to 35th. Yards per game, 448, so they went from first to 19th. Pass yards per game, 243, so they went from fifth in 2022 to 51st last year. And they had 53 plays of 20 yards or more, so they went from 14th to tied for 80th. So just kind of some
Yeah, that's
numbers to back
crazy.
it up. I think as I've said, all off season, I think we're going to get more back to those 2022 numbers, getting back to, top 10, top 20 in the country in passing yards, um, points per game, yards per game. I just feel like they're going to take a big step up because the main thing, they've got the quarterback that it's a Josh Heupel guy. I mean, this is obviously a 5-star talent coming out of high school. Really excited to see what Nico can do in this offense. I really feel like he's going to be, I think he's got a chance to be a superstar, honestly. And I think he's in the perfect offense to be able to show off his skill set. When I went back and watched the bowl game against Iowa, I was really impressed with his mobility. Obviously, he's a bigger guy, 6'6", about 215. Obviously, can make all the throws. I mean, but I was really impressed with his ability to run the ball outside the pocket, extended plays, and then also, when there were lanes for him to take off, he was able to do so and really pick up positive yardage. So I'm really excited to see a full off season of him being the guy, what they can do. What's your thoughts on this Tennessee offense and kind of as you look over this roster on the offensive side?
Yeah, offensively, I think they're about set up exactly like they want to be set up. They got decent amount of returning players. They got a really good receiving core. Obviously got Nico, who's been, pretty much the guy since he walked on campus. They were just grooming him into, until he took the reins over. So I don't really have any question marks about the offense necessarily. Josh Heupel's been successful everywhere he's been as a coach when it comes to offense. I mean, he won a championship, won the American League when he was in UCF. Their offense was unstoppable. He was really good at Oklahoma as the quarterback's coach and offensive coordinator there. He did a really good job there. And then obviously we've seen what he's done in Tennessee the last 3 years. He is in his first 3 seasons, so this will be his 4th season. His first 3 seasons, he's won 27 games. In Philip Fulmer's first 3 seasons at Tennessee, he won 28 games. So I'd say he's in pretty good company with Tennessee fans. I believe his record is 27-8, 27-9 at Tennessee, somewhere in that ballpark. So he's really been successful. Now he's finally got, this is his 4th year. So everybody that's on the roster now is guys he's recruited. They're his guys that he needed and cherry picked for his offense and his scheme. So offensively, I don't think that it's going to be, obviously I think they're going to be much better. There's going to be some hiccups at the quarterback position just because he's a young guy. But after the first 4 or 5 weeks, I mean, he's played and he's been in the practice rooms and the meeting rooms, and he's seen a bunch of reps. So after about the 4th or 5th week, those freshman rookie mistakes aren't going to be they aren't going to compound as much, I don't believe. I don't think they're going to feed off of each other. I think they'll dwindle away, and then we won't be saying that about him anymore. But my question mark is on the defensive side, because according to PFF, of the 9 linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties on Tennessee's defense last year that played 300 snaps or more, only one of those guys returns. So they're really going to have a really slim, inexperienced defensive backfield. They returned James Pierce on the edge. He's probably their best player on the defense. Not probably, he is their best player on defense. He's one of the best players in college football around the nation. I think he's definitely a top 5 defensive end in college football. So I think if they can build around him and if they can fill the roles that left their team last year defensive-wise, obviously I think they'll have a shot, but that's going to be so hard to do. Replacing 8 guys who had 300 or more snaps, I mean, that's a ton of experience, has a ton of football IQ. You can't teach that. I mean, that's just stuff that comes with obviously experience. And so that's my biggest question mark for them. But I also think you alluded to it. It may have been last week, but it may not have. It might have been 2 weeks ago before we got into the previews. You alluded to Tennessee being able to, it's okay if their defense isn't, top 5 defense because their offense is going to be that good and they're going to be able to score with people, kind of like they were in 2022 when they were able to beat Alabama. And it was just a high-scoring game. It was 48-45 was the final or something along those lines. I mean, in games like that, it's pretty much which offense is on the field last is who's going to win the game. So I think that they'll have a little bit of that this year in their offense. So I don't think their defense is going to have too much pressure on them. But that's the biggest question mark to me when it comes to Tennessee in 2024 is their defense.
Yeah, I agree totally. Just kind of want to touch on some of their offensive personnel a little bit. I really like the receiver core. Squirrel White, a guy here out of Birmingham, going into his 3rd year. He's one of the leaders in that room. And then I think getting Brew McCoy back off of injury, missed most of, if not all, last season. So he had a big impact in 2022. So I think he's a really big body guy too. So they're able to add Chris Brazel II from North Texas. So I think they've got a good, core in that room. Mike Matthews, one of the top freshmen coming out of high school. He's going to be joining the mix this year. So I like, what they have there. And I think they've got Nico's going to have some targets to really push the ball down the field like they really want to in Josh Heupel's offense. And the big thing for me is the offensive line returns a ton of snaps, a ton of experience, led by Cooper Mays, the senior. So I really like, the core they've got on offense, and I think it's a good situation for Nico to step into. And I think, too, getting that bowl game, getting that start and that experience, carrying that into the offseason, I think will serve him really well, too. So, like you said, it'll take a few weeks to kind of get his feet under him. They've got a couple, tests early. I'm actually going to pull up their schedule now. But I think, like you said, after he kind of gets his feet under him a little bit, I think he's really going to get it rolling downhill. And like I said, he's got the weapons around him to be successful. And then defensively, like you said, really like their front, led by James Pierce. That's another area they return a lot of experience on. Dominic Bailey, Amari Thomas, Bryson Eason up front. So on both lines of scrimmage, I think, and that's another reason people feel really good about Tennessee is they do return a lot of experience on both lines of scrimmage, along with a quarterback that you feel like has superstar upside, and has already shown that in flashes. So I totally understand why people are so high on Tennessee, and they should be. I mean, 11-2 in 2022, 9-4, still a really solid season last year. So like you said, the secondary is a concern, just due to how much experience they lost back there, and it really wasn't great anyway, even with a lot of experience. So you saw them target that in the portal. They didn't, obviously bring in a lot of guys via the portal, but a lot of the guys that they did, I think, will be able to contribute right away. Jermon McCoy, a transfer from Oregon State, Jalen McMurray from Temple. They brought in Brandon Turnage, or excuse me, I apologize, Jacoby Thomas from Middle Tennessee State. So several pieces there in the back end that are going to need to contribute right away. But yeah, I feel good about both lines of scrimmage. Quarterback, obviously, the skill players around him. I think if that secondary can kind of come into its own and have some guys step up, it's going to be a really solid, season in Knoxville for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited to see their offense and just how it looks, because it's not going to be identical to when Hendon Hooker was there. They're going to have a little bit things that are a little bit different, but I think it's going to be back to that base of what made that offense so spectacular and so show stopping, and them able to put up 50, 60 points, it seemed like, every single week. I mean, they were the high flying offense, fun to watch, and they were just not the same offense last year. I mean, I understand at the quarterback position you had a completely different type of quarterback, but like everybody's been talking, Nico he's what everybody's expecting to get back to the Hendon Hooker type offense that Josh Heupel is going to be running at Tennessee. They return their second in team rushing, Dylan Sampson. So he'll be back this year, and so I expect their run game to be pretty much identical to last year. Probably have 1,000-yard rusher just under it. So I expect them to, offensive wise, just have leaps and bounds better than they were last year. Kind of similar to what we saw in 2022. It's not going to be the exact same because some of the players around him aren't the same, but I do think that Nico steps into a great situation, especially with the offensive line, like you stuck with or alluded to. And Lance Hurd transferred in from LSU. They lost a guy, Gerald Mincy. He left for Kentucky, but they got a guy in from LSU. So they're patching places they need to, but that offensive line is as sturdy as they come. I mean, they're seasoned vets out there, and that is something that a lot of people, the casuals, as Josh Pate says, they don't understand how much those five guys up front can make or break the quarterback season. I mean, if you got somebody, I don't care if you got Cam Newton in the backfield, if his offensive line is not blocking for him, he's not going to have a good game. He's not going to have a good year. I mean, that is where everything starts. So, I mean, if Bryce Young had a better offensive line, he wouldn't have been hitting the dirt as much as he was, and he still looks spectacular. So imagine what he would have looked like his last year if he would have had an offensive line just a little half better than what they were. Because, I mean, they weren't terrible, but the offensive line he had in 2021 and the offensive line he had in 2022 were completely different, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big key, honestly. I mean, I think you kind of look at, what happened in Carolina last year's rookie year, one of the worst offensive lines for a professional team I've ever laid eyes on. And, until that gets fixed, that's going to really hamper his success. And like I said, I think that's why this year I think Nico's stepping into such a good situation because of that fact and the skill that he has around him, the coaching staff he has around him. I just feel like all the ingredients are there for him to be successful. And then Josh Heupel, I was listening to an interview with him recently, and he was talking about his offense and how it's predicated on the run game. Like it's really a run first offense, even though people may not see it that way, their rushing numbers from the last 2 years almost identical. In 2022, they ran for 199.4 yards a game. Last year was 204.9. So only a 5 yard difference. But the big the big difference in the offenses were the lack of explosiveness in the pass game, and that was really the reason they didn't have that similar success that they did the year before. And I
They
think
couldn't really take the top off the defense like they did with Hendon Hooker.
yeah, and I think too, like I said, that threat is going to open that run game up that much more, and I think it's going to make it that much more effective this year if they're able to really stretch the field like we know they can and like they've shown in the past. So I'm really excited to see if that comes to fruition, and if it does, they're going to be one of the more dangerous teams in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see the first time Nico decides to tuck it and really take it on a stroll because he can run too. Everybody talks about his passing ability. He's got the ability to make you miss an open space. So I'm just, man, I know we've been back and forth on him, or I say I've been back and forth. I like him when I'm high on him, but I've been up and down on how I think he'll do. But the more I looked into this when we were breaking this down and going into this recap, the more I'm starting to buy in a little bit more on the Nico hype. I mean, I was bought in, but I'm completely bought in. I'm sold. Signed, sealed, delivered, baby.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on this opening part of the schedule. I mean, I think, like you said, it's going to take a little time to get his feet under him, as is the entire team. A brand new season. Obviously, it helps that these guys, especially on the offensive side, have some experience playing together. But a couple pretty good tests here in the first 4 weeks. Open with Chattanooga, but you got NC State in week 2 in Charlotte. And then personally, it's probably in my top 6 or 7 SEC games this year. This week 4 trip to Norman. Josh Heupel going back home. I can't wait for this game. In my opinion, probably one of the best early season games in September. What are your thoughts on these first 4 weeks? And they're going to have a couple good tests early to kind of, get his feet wet a little bit.
Yeah, NC State's going to be a nice game for him to really find out what he's made of, what Nico and the team's made of. And then, yeah, week 4 going in. You got to go to Norman. That's tough. I mean, first SEC game on the road, new quarterback, seen him for 3 games, but he hasn't really been tested like he's about to be in Norman. So that's obviously must-see TV there. And then they follow it up. They got Arkansas, Florida, Alabama. So let's call it what it is. I mean, this is just how I'm going to see it right now. I say win week 1, 2, and 3. Being Norman, I'm going to say toss up, so I'm going to give it to Oklahoma right now. So that's 3-1. I'll give them Arkansas Gators. So that's 5-1. Alabama, I get them in third Saturday in October. My opinions may change on that after October, first weekend in October. I'll see how teams are playing. Feelings may change on that. But right now, I just think Alabama's that they're better around the board. So that'd be, what's that, 5-2. Now I think they get Kentucky, Mississippi State. So that's 7-2. And then Georgia, I think, gets them. They get UTEP and Vandy. So 9-3, and that's just me glossing over it. Just first gut instinct when I was looking. 9-3 at the absolute worst. Honestly, I don't think they should drop any of those games outside Georgia, Alabama, and maybe Oklahoma. But then very well they could beat Oklahoma week 4 if they're rolling right and things are going their way. They could beat Oklahoma. That's it. That puts them at 10-2, and that is 100% in contention to be in the college football playoff this year. I think a 10-2 SEC team with a schedule like this, 1,000% gets in, especially if you lose to Alabama and Georgia, you beat the others. So you're playing in Knoxville, losing to Alabama. As long as it's a one possession, 10-point game at max, I think that doesn't look too bad. Then you go to Athens and play Georgia. As long as they don't get blown out, I think they're in the playoffs if those are their only 2 losses. If it's a competitive game. Obviously, if they get thumped in both of those games and it's obviously not a contest, they're probably not going to get in. But seeing how those games turn out, I think will make a difference in where they end up ranking at the end of the year. But if they end 10-2, I say obviously I think they're going to make the playoffs. But best case scenario to me, I see 10-2 because even if you beat Alabama or beat Georgia, I still think you're losing to Oklahoma or Alabama or Oklahoma and Georgia. I don't think you're getting all three of those games. You may get one of those games and maybe two, but you're not getting all three of those games to me. So I think honestly, best case scenario 10-2, worst case scenario 8-4. But I'm like in the 9-3, 10-2 range is where I'm feeling. Kind of similar to Alabama, but with a little less confidence in the sense of I know for a fact Alabama is no worse going 10-2. I really truly feel that. But this team, I know for a fact I feel that hard about the 9-3, but I could definitely see 10-2, and I'm not mad at it.
Yeah, I mean that honestly, that's really about where I'm at on them. Honestly, I mean where I see them, I believe last I looked, they were 12th in national championship odds. That's honestly, I think that's about dead on the money. I see them like 9-3 to be honest. Like I said, could be 10-2. I do believe whatever their losses are going to be fairly close losses. Like I think if they lose in Norman, I think it's a pretty close game. I think if they lose to Alabama at home, I think it's a pretty close game. Um, Even that Georgia game, I still believe that's going to be a competitive game. So I think whether it's 9-3, 10-2, I do believe they're going to be pretty close losses. I don't see them probably getting blown out. I mean, you never know. Obviously, it happens in college football, but yeah, I think they're right on the borderline of getting in the playoff within a few spots. Like I see them in that 11-14 range. Like I think they're going to be just in or just out. Like it's a true bubble for me, depending on one or two of those results. Like if one of those, if that a close game against Alabama goes their way, I think that could get them in. Same thing with the Oklahoma win, or if they play in that Georgia, if they're able to say they have a loss or two at that point, they pull that one out. That's where I'm at with them. I think they're right on that borderline. I think it's going to go down to literally a few plays for them. That's kind of where I see it right now. But I think, if Nico obviously is playing at a high level, I think that's going to give them a good chance to get in the playoffs. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if he's a Heisman finalist. I really wouldn't. I think the ingredients are there for him to be successful. We've seen, second year guys or, first year starters, but, maybe second year guys like Bryce Young won the Heisman as a sophomore. Not saying he's going to,
Johnny Manziel.
But I think he's going to be in the conversation, certainly.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, that's Johnny Manziel, Bryce Young, Jameis Winston. I mean, that's three off the top of the head right there. I'm sure there's more I could name if I thought about it. But that's three off the top of the head, and that's all in recent years.
Yeah, so I think he's going to be in the conversation, and if he's in the conversation, that's going to bode really well for Tennessee. And I guess if I had to predict it right now, I would probably have them 9-3, just barely missing the playoffs. If I had to just lock in a prediction on it right now, but I literally believe it's going to be within a few plays because I think it's a 9-3 with a couple close losses, and if a few plays go their way, could be 10-2. I mean, I don't really have the ceiling on anybody as 12-0 in the SEC, but I mean, 11-1's not unfathomable. I mean, probably not super likely, but yeah, I'm in that 9-3, 10-2 range, but I'd say 9-3 if I have to lock
in on it. And that week 4 game obviously is going to mean a lot more because Heupel, played there, won a national championship there, ended up coaching there, coached for 8 seasons there. From 2006 to 2014, didn't leave on his own volition. He got fired by Oklahoma. Oklahoma fired him. So I think that's going to, obviously get a little more fuel to the fire of him wanting to go in there and win, obviously, because he was let go from a staff and from a team that really wasn't all on him for the reason that they weren't super successful. So he gets let go, ends up going to Utah State after that. So obviously there's a little more in it than just being a big game. It's also Oklahoma's first SEC game. First SEC game. They're hosting Tennessee with their former or with the coach of Tennessee being their former Heisman finalist, national championship winning quarterback who used to coach for them. I mean, you can't write a script better than that. I mean, this is movie type stuff. I mean, the only thing that would make it better is if it was the final national championship game or the SEC championship game. But this being Oklahoma's first ever game to the SEC, lucky them that it is in Norman. But I think that's really cool because Josh Heupel gets to go back to Norman. There's going to be a lot of stories around it. And I think that I think for the fact that he got fired by them and there was a sour taste left in his mouth by Oklahoma, I think there's a good chance that if he has enough of a lead where he should call off the Dogs, so to say, I don't think he's going to call off the Dogs. I think that if he's up in this game, he's going to run them into the dirt until the final zero hits. I'm telling you, I just had that feeling because I feel like there's some hostility from Heupel there towards Oklahoma from what happened to him at the end of his career there.
Like I said earlier, I mean, to me, especially in the early season, this is in my top 6 or 7. Like I said, and that it probably should be higher, but there's so many good. I don't have the list in front of me of all the SEC matchups, but this one honestly is high up on my list for the entire season, especially when you're talking about in September. I'm looking at the SEC schedule for Week 4, September 21st. There is no reason this game shouldn't be in prime time. Like if this game isn't 7 o'clock on ABC, somebody got it bad wrong. I need this game in prime time. This is appointment television, dude. Appointment television. I cannot wait for this matchup. To me, like you said, the external factors, as you mentioned, with Josh Heupel going back home, obviously Tennessee's first SEC game, first SEC start for Nico, first SEC game, period, for Oklahoma. Nico going on the road against this Oklahoma defense with Brent Venables. Norman is going to be absolutely rocking. Man, I can't wait for this matchup. I'm excited just thinking about it. But yeah, to me, it's one of the premier, early season matchups, and I think it's, both these teams have playoff aspirations. I mean, Oklahoma, obviously has a brutal schedule, but they're a top, 10 talent roster in college football. Tennessee, yes, as we've laid out, has playoff aspirations. So, I mean, this game's going to go a long way to, deciding that and propelling one of these teams forward. So, yeah, it's appointment viewing, no doubt about it. I can't wait.
Scroll down, Pat. Keep going down to the bottom of the schedule. Okay, so they got, as of right now, preseason rankings, they have 5 preseason top 25 teams on their schedule. I mean, that's pretty solid. At the end of the year, they potentially could have, 4 top 25, 6 top 25, 3. Depends on, obviously, how the season falls out and how the teams end up being ranked. But 5 preseason top 25 teams, I mean, that's a pretty brutal schedule looking at it at the start of the year. I mean, you get a couple of easier games early in the year, but I mean, in your first 4 weeks, you have 2 top 25 games, both of them on the road. Technically, the second week is a neutral site, but you're still not playing in front of your home fans against a top 25 preseason team. So you're on the road against North Carolina State, ranked 18 preseason. On the road at Norman, true road game against number 14 North Carolina or Oklahoma. You get Alabama at home, but then you have to go to Kentucky, or excuse me, you have to go. You host Kentucky, but then you have to go to Athens. So you get 4 games or 3 games at home, or on the road 2 games at home. And of the 2 games that you want at home, you get 1 of them at home. You really would like to have Georgia and Knoxville, but of the 5 preseason 25 ranked teams that they're playing, 3 of them are on the road, or 3 of them are not at Knoxville. 2 true road games, 2 true home games, 1 neutral site game. So that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely a tough schedule. I mean, there's no easy ones. It's not the hardest of all the SEC schedules, certainly. But I do like the way it sets up for them. You look ahead of, like you said, you name those 5 kind of key games there. You've got the week 2 matchup, neutral site. Should be a really good crowd there in Charlotte. Pretty short drive, obviously, but NC State's there as well. So, going to be a good crowd both sides. But that's week 2. But you open with Chattanooga to kind of get your feet under you. You return home. In between NC State and Oklahoma, you get Kent State, so kind of get a little bit of a refresher there, regroup. You have an off week before at Arkansas, and then you get Florida at home before Alabama. And honestly, I think this game will be closer than a lot of people think, just because these games are always super heated, even when no matter what the records are of these two teams. I feel like this game always kind of comes down to the wire a little bit. So I do think Florida, it's not one you can overlook, certainly, but you would be, you're glad that, it's really your toughest game before one of your ranked games. But, at the end of the day, it's not, you don't have Georgia or Alabama, back to back or anything. I think the second off week is very good, regardless if they win or lose against Alabama. To me, that's a good week to kind of reset yourself, because that's such an emotional, physical type of ball game. So I think win or lose, that's a good week to have a bye right after that to kind of reset yourself for the final, stretch run. Like I said, you got the bye week for Kentucky, and then you got Mississippi State at home before going to Georgia. So I do feel like in front of some of the ranked games, or some of their easier games. So I think the schedule lays out pretty nicely for them. But in the end, some really tough, ranked games though. I mean, anytime you got Georgia and Alabama on the schedule, it's not going to be easy. But I think it's manageable enough to, I think they're going to be in the mix in that 9-3, 10-2, area. That week 4, game in Oklahoma to me is really pivotal. If they're able to grab that one, I feel like they're going to be in really good position moving forward the rest of the year.
Absolutely.
Jump over to Ole Miss. As I said, another team, with sky high expectations, with playoff, aspirations, and even goals of going further in the playoff. We've touched a good bit on Ole Miss, over this summer, since the season ended. Because it's felt like a lot's been invested into 2024, but it's kind of been building up to this, this potential, the roster that they put together. So I'm really excited to see, how the season pans out for them. And even though, like I said, they've won, double-digit games 2 of the last 3 years. In 2021 and 2023, their finishes would have been good enough to get them in a 12-team playoff. So the question has kind of been this year, this offseason, is making the playoff good enough? Would that be considered a success, or do they need to do more than that? Because like I said, 2 of their last 3 finishes would have been good enough to get them in a 12-team playoff. So that's why I've kind of been making the argument. And I feel like we've been pretty aligned on this, just as far as not only do they need to make a playoff, but I think winning a game, if they're able to do that, I feel like, that's really, really successful. Even just making a playoff, obviously they've never done that. It would still be, a successful year. But I do think they need to have the ability to make some noise. I think, honestly, that's what Ole Miss fans are expecting. They're 7th in national championship odds, the highest I'm sure they've ever been before. So kind of what's your thoughts on Ole Miss expectations, and then kind of as this roster as you look over it?
Expectations, there's no question, it is playoff or bust. I think you make a great point of, getting there is great, but you at least need to win one. I think that's a very high possibility. I think they have a very good chance to make a run to the Final Four. And then you never know what happens then. Honestly, looking at their schedule, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, first 6 weeks, they should start out 6-0, and they should head into Baton Rouge 6-0. Time slot there is the teetering time slot. They haven't decided which one yet, but 6 to 8. So it's going to be a night game in Baton Rouge. Tough environment. They're going to be ready. They're going to be hostile, especially after what happened last year, the shootout, the barn burner that ended up with Ole Miss on top. They're going to be ready to play. I'll say LSU wins that game. So, excuse me, that's 6-1. Got a big bye week after that game before you host Oklahoma, Arkansas. I think they get both of those games. So that's 8-1. Then you got Georgia. Probably dropping that one. Who's after Georgia for them? Off week, Florida, I'll give you that. I think they're going to win the Egg Bowl. So that's 10-2 for them. 11-1 if they beat LSU. I just don't think they're going to beat Georgia. I really don't. If they're going to beat Georgia, if Ole Miss is going to beat Georgia, it's got to be this year. Like you said, there's so much invested in this team. There's so much that everyone, all the expectations that's been thrown around them by the media, by the fans, by the team themselves. I mean, it is clear as day they are going all in. They're putting all their chips on the table, all their eggs in one basket, and it's the 2024 season. So if this is the season that they're going to get Georgia, or if this is the time to get Georgia, it'll be this season. After that, I don't know that they're going to have a chance. They're stacked to the gills. They went transfer portal heavy. Got a bunch of older guys, a bunch of guys that have played a lot of college football at a high level. They're not some guys that are coming from different levels. They've all come from Power 5 schools, played a lot of football. I think honestly, man, 11-1 is realistic. 10-2 is I'm as confident as 10-2, if not more confident than I am of Alabama's 10-2. But I think 11-1 is extremely realistic. I think that it's going to be Ole Miss. I know I said months ago that hot take Texas is going to win the SEC. I think we'll get a Georgia Ole Miss rematch in the SEC championship game. I think they'll both end 11-1. If I'm being real, that LSU game, if Ole Miss can get by LSU second weekend of October at Baton Rouge, I think that sets them up 100% for an 11-1 season. Potentially playing in Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta. That was the thing that shocked me the most, honestly. I've had them at 4 or 3 or 4, whatever I had them at. I had them inside the top 5. I said I think they're good enough. I don't think they'll compete for the SEC, but I think they'll make the playoffs. But man, looking at their roster, the defensive side of the ball, Walter Nolan, Prince Uman I butcher that kid's name every time. I believe it or not, guys, I actually try to practice that name, but when the camera turns on, I can't do it. So Uman Mielen, I think something along those lines. You guys know who I'm talking about. And then on the offensive side of the ball, Juice Wells joining them and people like that. So I just Jackson Dart's back. They did lose Quinshawn, but they still got a really deep stable of running backs. So I think they're set up for success. We've talked about them, ad nauseum on this podcast. We've honestly, surprisingly, talked about them more than we've talked about Auburn and Alabama. I mean, we're from the South, from Auburn, from Alabama. That's pretty much what we know. We understand that we cover them a little harder than other schools and other places. It's not on purpose. It just ends up coming out in our conversation just because that's how much we care. It just, it gets that way sometimes. But honestly, man, the last 6 to 8 months, I feel like we've been covering Ole Miss more than we've covered anybody. So I'm excited to see where this team goes. But realistically, I don't think it's that far-fetched of an idea to see Ole Miss at the end of the season following November 29th. I don't think it's a crazy thought that they could be 11-1. I genuinely don't believe that. I think that could be a real possibility. I think 10-2 is a for sure. Go ahead, lay your money on it. But 11-1 is a high possibility, and it wouldn't shock me if the only way that it would shock me if they were 11-1 is if they lost to LSU and beat Georgia. Then I'd be a little shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I like it, man. I mean, I think I'd
it's
love
bold.
to see that.
It's a little rich take, but I feel it.
Yeah, I mean, I like it a lot. I think the schedule is pretty manageable, like you said. They are better than those first 6 teams they play. One thing I will say is that Kentucky game, even though it's in Oxford, their last three matchups have been decided by, I believe, 10 points or less combined. I think they won. I think they played in 2022. Ole Miss won by 4 or 5 points. They played 2 years before that, won by a field goal, I believe. So their last three matchups have been really, really close. So I mean, that's a game. Obviously, they're better than Kentucky, but that's one to keep your eye on. Um, and I think too they got to be careful with South Carolina going to Williams-Brice just because it's before that LSU game. There's a couple there. They're better than these teams, but we know how it is in the SEC, man. There's no really gimme games, especially when you're talking about fairly quality teams on the other side. Those are just ones that they got to be careful of, because those teams are capable of beating you if you're not on your A game. If you're kind of in a look ahead spot a little bit, like you said, I think that LSU game on October 12th is really the key game on their schedule. Um, they played some classics over the last couple of years. I mean, last year, arguably the game of the year in college football in Oxford. Um, I can't wait for that matchup. That's on my list, as well as appointment television there in Baton Rouge. Night game on October 12th. Can't wait to see that. Like I said, that's a big turning point game for Ole Miss if they're able to get that one. Um, like you said, that 11-1 could become a big time reality for them.
Yeah,
And
I mean, just think about it. We're sitting here on October 13th. We wake up on Sunday morning. LSU is 7-0. Think about it. All the conversation is going to be about is who is LSU, or excuse me, who is Ole Miss going to play in Atlanta? That's what the conversations are going to be. If we wake up October 13th and LSU is 7-0 for the next until not November 9th, they're going to be talking about the SEC championship game. And then come November 9th, and the week of November 9th, you're probably going to be hearing about this could be the rematch, or this could be the preview of the SEC championship game this year. That's all we're going to be hearing. I'm telling you. If we wake up 13th 7-0 and Ole Miss is 7-0, that's what the news is going to be around the SEC. Georgia and Ole Miss, November 9th, preview to the SEC championship game.
yeah, and I like where that bye week is, that first one.
Oh yeah.
Coming after LSU, regardless, kind of like I said with Tennessee, win or loss, coming off of that, it's a good chance to reset yourself, kind of gather yourself. Like I said, if they're 7-0 at that point, two of their next three games, you got Oklahoma and Georgia both in Oxford. So I think that'll give them a chance to reset themselves. Say they lose that game at LSU and they're 6-1. Again, another a chance to reset themselves because that Oklahoma game becomes that much more important. Early kickoff there at the Vault. That's obviously a key game. I mean, that to me is their two big ones, because even if they lose to Georgia, that's not really going to determine if they make the playoffs or not. It's really going to determine, can they beat LSU, Oklahoma. I like the fact they're second bye weeks before they go to Gainesville. Obviously, we don't know what Florida's going to be at this point, but that's 11 o'clock. That's not an easy place to play. Who knows what their mentality is going to be like? If they come out with a good mentality, I mean, that's a trap game for them. It's right before the Egg Bowl. It's coming off the coming off the Georgia game. So, yeah, I mean, there's really several critical ones on there, but to me, it's more about, do they take care of, Oklahoma? Can they win at LSU? Can they take care of Kentucky and at Florida? Like, those are the games that's going to really determine it or not. But kind of talking about this Georgia game, though, even though we talked about their success to, the last several years, specifically the last 2 out of the last 3, even though they've had, they've won 10 games, they won 11 games last year, they haven't been able to get over that hurdle of Georgia. Now, they haven't really been able to beat the big dogs, so to speak. That's what they built this roster to do, is to go head to head with Georgia, with Alabama, with the big boys around college football. I'm curious, are they going to be able to take that step? Because that's really the last step for them. Like I said, they've been to New Year's Six bowl games, they've won them. Can they really, even though they've been at the top or near the top of the SEC, they feel like this roster is going to give them a chance to really do that. Because even though they've won double digit games, there's still been a gap there. Have they closed that gap? That's really my biggest question, and what I'm curious to know. If they've closed that gap or not. Can they beat a Georgia? Can they beat, an Alabama or a Texas? Or if they get to Atlanta, can they beat that team across from them? That's really what I want to know and what I'm most curious to find out. And kind of looking at their roster, I mean, the pieces are there. They should be able to compete at the highest level. I've been blowing smoke for Jackson Dart all off season. Having him return again. I believe this is the only time Lane Kiffin's had a third-year returning quarterback as well for the first time in his career. So that's huge. Jackson Dart's played some really good football for them the last 2 years. He's got a fantastic receiving corps led by Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, bringing in Juice Wells from South Carolina. They return Caden Prescore. Micah Pettis and Caleb Warren return on the offensive line. As we mentioned before, we know it's well known Lane Kiffin's the portal king, bringing in an influx of talent each offseason. They brought in 24 transfers. Surprisingly, that was only second in the SEC. I figured it was first, but A&M actually brought in 28. They did have a coaching change, so it's a little bit different. But brought in 24. Some guys that can plug and play offensively. I mentioned Juice Wells, Diego Pounds from North Carolina, Nate Kalepo, and Julius Bulow both from Washington. Those are guys they feel like can step in, contribute right away. Looking at this offense from a talent perspective, should be one of the most explosive in the country. With Lane Kiffin, at the controls too. I'm excited to see how they take even another step forward this year. But offensively, that they don't really take a backseat anymore.
Yeah, I'm just going to read some names of just some of the guys on their roster. This is not even scratching the surface. All right, Jackson Dart, Princely Umanmielen, Trey Harris, Jared Ivey, Caden Prescorn, Walter Nolan, Ulysses Bentley, J.J. Pegues, Jordan Watkins, Chris Paul Jr., Juice Wells, Trey Amos. I mean, and then that's not even hitting the offensive line. So that amount of star power, I think I just named like 10 or 11 players, and that doesn't even scratch the surface of all the guys they got on their roster that's going to contribute at a high-level star power household type name. So like we've said ad nauseum, man, this is the roster for Ole Miss to finally get over the hump, compete with the big boys, get in the postseason, make a run at the national championship game, and potentially be one of the last few teams there to fight for it and hoist that trophy at the end. So I'm high on this Ole Miss team. I'm higher now than I was a month ago. I was never down on them, but I'm higher than I was on them a month ago. So that's why I like doing these, man, because it'll change my opinion on some things. It'll make me higher on some teams, maybe a little lower on some team. Doesn't mean I'm right. It changes my feelings every year I go into it. I'll look at teams here and there, but when we really do a deep dive into these things, I really form my full opinion that I'm going to die on that hill for that year. And I might be wrong. I picked Missouri to finish last year or something, next to last, whatever it was. I was wrong on them, but I died on that hill that day. So I mean, I feel like I'm fairly realistic when it comes to these things, and just looking at this schedule, this is probably the only thing Ole Miss is ranked last in the SEC is strength of schedule. I mean, if we're being real, they might be 14, but they definitely have one of the more favorable schedules in the SEC. None of them are easy. We've discussed that. They all have their own, the SEC's top talent teams, but of the SEC team schedules they have one of the most favorable ones for sure. Definitely can navigate their way to a postseason berth with a schedule like this and a team that they have built the last 2 years.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to highlight too that you mentioned a minute ago is the not only just taking transfers, but the quality of guys. Like you just look on the defensive side of the ball, coming from SEC programs. You mentioned Chris Paul from Arkansas, Princely Umamielen
Yeah.
from Florida. That's a tough one, man. I'm
Tongue
like you,
twister,
man.
man.
I practice these names as well, and I apologize the ones I do
Yeah.
mess up.
I really do
Uh,
apologize. We
Obviously,
try.
Walter. Yeah, I respect his game
Yeah.
tremendously, and I
Yeah.
apologize for not pronouncing it correctly. But you mentioned Walter Nolan, obviously star defensive tackle from A&M, Trey Amos from Alabama, Brandon Turnage. He came from Tennessee going to Ole Miss. I was trying to keep him in Tennessee secondary. He's actually in Ole Miss's secondary. So I corrected myself right after that earlier. But Brandon Turnage is actually on Ole Miss, coming
Mhm.
from Tennessee. They expect him to have an impact. Key Lawrence coming from Oklahoma. So a lot of SEC talent, SEC caliber talent on this defense. A lot of star power, as you mentioned. So we highlighted what they have, the firepower on the offensive side of the ball. So yeah, I mean all the pieces, are here. Um, this is coaching staff that's been around too. So, I mean, I think that the feeling in Oxford from the coaching staff, from the fan base, from the administration is, this is a team that can compete at the highest level, and they've, like you said, they put all their eggs in this basket. Not to say they're not going to be good in 25 and beyond, but this is the year that they've really, like I said, put those eggs in the basket, push those poker chips to the middle of the table. We're going all in on 24. We're not really worried beyond that. This team's got like 60 seniors on it, I feel like. I mean, I'm looking down the depth chart or the projected depth chart in the roster. Every other guy's a senior. I mean, offensively, I'm counting. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I'm counting one, two, three. I mean, four, five. So I mean, it's like eight, nine, 10 guys that are seniors. It's crazy.
It
Um,
honestly reminds me a lot of the Rams. What was that, 2021 when they won the Super Bowl? I mean, they went all in on that roster, and the next year they lost everybody, and they weren't any good. I feel like that's how it's going to be, or that's what it's trending like. I believe it was 2021 Rams. But the Rams last Super Bowl team, when they got Matthew Stafford from the Lions, and they went all in. They had Aaron Donald, and their team was stacked. They went all in, won the Super Bowl. They wasn't able to retain anybody the next year, and they went really downhill. So that's kind of the same vibes I'm getting from this Ole Miss team.
yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, it's the mindset of they're all in on this team. Um, and that is one of the positives that you can do in the portal is obviously, when you build your roster through that route, you allow yourself to get a lot of experience, get a lot of upperclassmen, junior, seniors, guys who have been in college football, played a lot of snaps. Um, so that's kind of the route they've been able to go. And I'm curious, if they have the season that a lot of people think they can have, will that allow them to kind of be able to focus more on? Will that allow them to get in on some of those high
Right.
school prospects that maybe they haven't been able to get in the past? Kind of put put Ole Miss on some of those guys' radar. Maybe keep some more of those guys home, and maybe not have to rely on the portal as much going forward. I'm kind of curious to see if that is the case, if they're able to have the season that we all think they can have and what they expect to have. I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out, but obviously, they've added 20 plus portal guys a year. I'm sure that's gonna continue for the most part, and allow them to kind of keep some experience. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a little bit of a drop off, after this season, just due to what they put into this. Um, I don't think they'll go in a tank necessarily, but obviously, the step back is going to be at least moderately steep, probably.
So you better
But
make it count. You better make 2024 count. If you're going all in, you better at least make it to the playoffs.
Oh, 100%. And kind of looking at their schedule, like you said, you're going with 11-1. I like 10-2. I think it's a playoff team as kind of we both said over the entire offseason. I feel like 10-2 is a pretty good spot. Um, I'm curious to see where that would land them exactly, as far as maybe hosting a first round game. It depends on what everyone else does and kind of how things shake out. But as you mentioned a couple weeks ago, I'd love to see them host a playoff game at the vault. It'd be electric for sure. But yeah, of the SEC teams making it into the playoffs, this is one that I picked going in. I think 10-2 is a pretty good sweet spot, but I like your 11-1 pick. It's certainly, I mean, looking at the schedule, like you said, it's one of, if not the most manageable one in the SEC, and I think it's got to, it's going to be a good chance for them to accomplish all their goals this year and get in the playoffs and be able to make some noise.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. But we can't get out of here without officially welcoming Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC. It is July 1st. It is 8:30 p.m. July 1st when we're recording this right now. But today, this morning, midnight rolled around, and officially Oklahoma and Texas joined the SEC. They are now part of the big dogs, the alphas, the top guys. The people that they thought they were, they're now officially a part of. So welcome in, guys. Happy to have you. Absolutely happy to have you. Only makes the conference better. Only going to make the Saturdays better. So I'm ecstatic about this. What are your initial thoughts? Initial, not concerns, but maybe just things you're looking forward to. Maybe some things that Oklahoma and Texas fans need to be wary of or be warned about coming in and joining the SEC. What are some of your thoughts on that?
First off, I've been seeing some smack talk going on Twitter. I'm loving every second of it.
All from Texas.
Yeah, I don't know if I've heard an Oklahoma fan chirp yet, but I'm here for it though. That's what makes it fun. I like seeing, you're seeing some alliances forming that haven't before. Some of the old SEC guard going against Texas. Texas coming in fresh off a playoff, berth. They're walking in like they own the place already. So, but I'm here for it. It's really fun to see. As you mentioned, I mean, I'm excited for it. It only makes the SEC stronger. I mean, you're talking about two of the premier brands in college football and college athletic. Period. I mean, it makes the SEC stronger across the board in all sports. I mean, you highlighted. You know, like that was the softball national championship matchup. We know what they bring on the football field. Basketball programs are really, really good. Same with baseball as well. I mean, we just had a big swap in college baseball from Texas A&M to Texas. So I mean, perfect time for that to happen with Texas joining the SEC too. I mean, that just only adds fuel to the fire. So,
and that's an old rivalry of an old hatred that just relit the flame with that old rivalry. Right, perfect timing, man.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you couldn't have
storybook drama.
I mean, it's like that was like a reality TV show. It's like they made that up. Honestly, it's perfect timing as you mentioned. But I will say the thing I'm most excited about is just the old rivalries that get renewed. Getting the Red River Shootout in the SEC now. I think that's awesome. Rekindling. Texas and Texas A&M. Texas and Arkansas.
That's the one I think is going under the radar. That I'm excited that's coming back.
Yeah, they played a couple years ago in Fayetteville. That was an electric atmosphere. Arkansas was able to win that game, and that's an old Southwest rivalry. That gets rekindled. I'm excited for the new rivalries that'll form as well that haven't in the past. I'm excited to see Texas, play Georgia, play Florida, Oklahoma, play Alabama and Auburn, and all the teams around. I'm excited scheduling difference, a shakeup with that. That's something that's been much needed for a while. Just glad to finally see that, and I think Texas and OU joining the SEC kind of made that into reality a little bit quicker. We've needed a schedule shakeup for a while, and being able to see more teams on an annual basis, on a 3 and 4 year basis, not being 10 years in between road trips to Gainesville and things of that nature. Um, I like the fact that we've gone away with divisions. You're getting the top two teams in Atlanta every year. Um, even though I will miss in a sense the East West, not playing Mississippi States and the Ole Misses every year, but I think the schedule shakeup was much needed. I think Texas and OU joining helped facilitate that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like the fact on the new schedule, though, that it's the two best teams in the SEC. It's not the best team from the East, the best team from the West, and somebody from the East is being left out that shouldn't be, or vice versa. So I like that it's the two top dogs in the SEC, two of the best in the conference. I think that's the way it should be. Obviously, I think it just makes for better entertainment come that Saturday when they're playing. And so I'm extremely excited about it. But the thing that I feel like we need to warn the Oklahoma and Texas fan bases about is that when you're in the Big 12 and you're going to play Kansas State or Kansas or I know some of them are in the Big 12 or whatever still.
TCU.
In TCU and teams along those lines, when it's week 7, week 8, and they're 4-4, 5-3, season's over with. There is no chance that they're getting anything. They're probably not going to a bowl game. When you go to those games, those fans, half of them ain't there. They're checked out. They're only there to go to the tailgate and talk to their girlfriends. They're not there to watch football and be active and get rowdy and let that game determine their happiness or their sadness that evening. That's not the reason they're there. You march in to Arkansas and they're 3-5, you are not going to know it. Their fans are going to be acting like they're 8-0. They're going to be ready to kick a hole in your ass. And so that's the biggest thing that I don't think they're quite ready for. Team-wise, I think they understand it. Fan base-wise, I don't think that they are going to get ready to be barked at. I mean, it's happening. Get ready to, when you walk into stadiums, at the opposing stadium, to have middle fingers galore shoved up in your nose. I'm telling you, you guys are not ready for the fan bases that comes with the SEC. The lowest tier, South Carolina, they're 2-4. They're still going to be jumping around a Sandman like they are undefeated playing for the SEC championship game. The environments are different, the fan bases are different, and you are going to get your feelings hurt. If this is more at Texas than Oklahoma because Texas whines about everything, but the horns down thing, getting all pissy about that, if that is the worst thing and it's going to hurt your feelings, wake up, get ready, buckle up, because you are going to have hurt feelings every venue you travel to that's not in Texas, that's not in Austin or in Norman, because the fan bases here are amped up by 100 compared to every other fan base across any other conference.
Yeah, I think you hear a lot about, and I do think these are two teams that are well equipped to come in the SEC and compete right away. I mean, you look at the talent that's on there, and there's always a lot of been made about, well, look at so and so's record against the SEC, or look at this conference record against the ACC or the SEC, and all that. The biggest thing for me that I don't think a lot of this goes for teams and fans understand, it's not just playing against an SEC team, but it's doing it week after week after week. That is the real challenge of it. It's not that Texas or OU or any other team for that matter. It's not that they can't compete against the SEC or beat some SEC teams. It's you're in week 5 of a 5-week stretch against, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Like, you play 4 and 5, try playing 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row against these teams. That's when it really adds up and takes a toll on you. That's when you really start to feel it. It's not just playing them in a bowl game or playing them one out non-conference game.
Right.
I think that's when some of these teams and fan bases will really see the difference when you're on, when you got playing 4 or 5 weeks in a row, back to back to back to back to back. That's when it really, adds up, and that's when you really see the depth of the SEC kind of show up in a big way and wear a lot of teams down. So that's you don't get that as much, in some of the other conferences, the Big 12 or the Pac 12, or ACC. You just don't get that level of athlete and level of competition 4 or 5 weeks in a row. Like you play big games, but it's not as often because the talent, even the back half of the SEC, is so much more talented than teams in a lot of other conferences. So, I mean, they put the most players in the NFL every year. I mean, they recruit. They have 10, 11, 12 teams in the top 25 in recruiting every year. It's just where the most talent is. It's where the best coaches are for the most part. And I think you don't really see it until you really get into the meat of your schedule and playing back-to-back weeks. And that's when it really shows, in my opinion.
Exactly. It's like saying if I built a baseball team and we played a 10-game season and we went 10-0, and then I had another baseball team and we played a 100-game season and we went 85-15. People are going to say the 10-0 team's better because they didn't lose. But my guys over here played 90 more ball games.
Yeah.
So when you play more, you're going to have more of a chance to lose. So it's going to happen a lot more often. So I'm with you with what you're saying there. Like, I mean, you got to think 2 years ago, Georgia had a close game with Missouri. Missouri shouldn't have even been on. This isn't last year's Missouri team. This was 2 years ago's Missouri team that won 6 games or 7 games, whatever. Didn't deserve to be on the same field with Georgia, and they took them down to the wire and almost beat them. It took a pretty good last drive for Stetson to win the game. So anything can happen, and that's because they had, like you said, a 4 or 5 week stretch of playing SEC team after SEC team after SEC team. They were just worn down, and they got caught on a bad Saturday. That's not. Doesn't happen as often in the Big 12 and in the Pac-10 or Pac-12 or the Big 10 as it does in the SEC.
Yeah, there's just not many. There's not really any breeders. The quality of athlete, the quality of coaching staffs and programs in the SEC is just a whole nother level than what you get elsewhere. And like I said, that's when it really starts to show. And like I said, just playing the SEC team once every now and then, you can't really get that feel of once you really get into it. And, like I said, you play a 8, 9 game SEC schedule and like I said, play 4 or 5 weeks in a row without a bye. And that's when it really starts to add up. But like I said, this is 2 teams that are well equipped to come in and be successful starting off. But that's definitely something that you won't be able to experience it until you do experience it, and you won't really know what it's like. And that's definitely something to keep in your mind as you're going through the season. And because you just don't have many breathers in the SEC. Even games that you chalk down as W's, you got to go out and earn them because nobody's giving you an inch. And there's a lot of quality teams from top to bottom in this league. Really mainly appreciate everyone tuning in for part 2 of our SEC preview series. Excited to be back for part 3 of next week of an 8-week series. Like I said, it's going to lead us into mid-August and towards the season. Just appreciate, like I said, everyone tuning in. If you give us a like and subscribe, really appreciate it. Had a good bit of viewers on our last video. I really appreciate that. Hope y'all tuned into this one as well and find it very informative and hopefully able to learn as much as we have doing some of this research and kind of scouting into both these teams. I'm excited to see both these teams this fall and if they can reach their expectations. Just be sure to follow us on Twitter as well at Saturdays_SEC, and we'll see you guys back next week.
Thank you, guys.